Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be doing my usual rundown of PMQs. To say it was a session with a lame duck Prime Minister actually did have some worthy discussion points. I'm going to put aside my thoughts on the confidence vote, fun and games, which I alluded to the fact I may be discussing that today. I'll put that off until tomorrow, because this was a spicy one in parts. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the session got off to a really bad start. Two Alba MPs made an absolute arse of themselves. You might expect some rowdiness in the first PMQ since Johnson announced he was stepping down. This was something else. For those who don't know, so Alba are the party that former SNP leader Alex Salmond made to try and make himself relevant again. And he won some converts from the SNP, which is why he's got two MPs in Westminster. And I'm guessing from their behaviour today, those who remain in the SNP are probably glad to see the back of them. I get the feeling that Alba are basically to Scottish independence what UKIP were to Brexit. It's the party that attracts all the loonies who feel too constrained in mainstream politics. But they were kicked out, and so it was on to the next loudmouth, Boris Johnson himself. During the proceedings, he seemed to suggest that this would be his last PMQs. And I thought, well, Parliament's still in session next week, so there will be a PMQs next Wednesday. Johnson seemed fairly sure he wouldn't be here for it. He was like, towards the end of his responses to Starmer, he was speaking as if this was going to be the last time he'd be sparring with Starmer. You know, he offered the possibility that the contest to replace him might be over by then. In theory, it would if loads of if contenders backed out at the last minute. But that'd only be possible if one of the final two for the race to replace him dropped out. Now, two reasons why I don't think this will happen. First of all, I think the ones that are going to get themselves on that ballot to go to the members, I don't think any of the favourites would want to drop out. It did happen in 2016, very different circumstances then. But also now they've changed the party rules to state they're not allowed to do so. Quite how you'd enforce it is another matter. You know, so if this is to be his final PMQs and he's confident of that, it basically means he's either planning on getting his MPs to vote for Parliament to shut up shop early, which is possible, I suppose, or he's off on a visit. Usually a foreign visit is the excuse for an absence from Parliament. So maybe he's off to Ukraine again. And as if he is off to Ukraine, you wouldn't really announce it ahead of time, except he sort of has. I don't know. But anyway, on to Starmer's questions. He started off with a bit of cheek. I like that. Bear in mind there've been a few changes in Cabinet since last week. Starmer welcomed some of the new ministers, noting that the new Northern Ireland Secretary once asked if he needed a passport to go to Derry. He also referred to Nadhim Zahawi, the new Chancellor, as the Right Honourable Member for Stratford and Gibraltar, which is basically a sneaky dig at his suspect financial affairs. And on that note, he also asked where Johnson stood on tax-avoiding non-doms, given that the PM is now free to speak his mind, he said. Needless to say, Johnson did not answer the question. He knows that non-dom status is unpopular, especially now, especially with the cost of living crisis. What people really don't want to know is that the government are telling them they can't do more to help them with financial difficulties. And yet we've got some very wealthy people, some of them in the government, who have in the past or are now getting out of paying some UK taxes, whether lawfully or not. And Johnson will know that the policy of knocking it on the head will be popular for Labour. But he did try and make a piss poor joke about some of his achievements. Job vacancies at an all-time high. The implication, I think, being that people can find it easier to find work. Problem is, high vacancies also means two things that should concern them. First, businesses are struggling to get enough staff. That means problems powering our economy. Now, that would be of concern to any government of any stripes. But second, it means that workers have a choice, doesn't it? If they live in an area with lots of vacancies, that is. They're not evenly distributed around the country, of course. But where they do have that choice, they've got more power to demand better pay. And if they don't get it, well, I'll just go somewhere else and I'll get a better paid job somewhere else. Something this Tory government is opposed to. They don't want workers demanding higher pay. You know, Starmer also brought up the tax cuts that various leadership contenders had promised. £330 billion worth of giveaways, he said. Double the budget for the NHS, he said. He asked if the Prime Minister agreed that they should explain where they're going to get the cash from. Obviously, there was no point in asking questions directly of Johnson. He's going. Not as quickly as many would like, including in the Tory party, but he is still going. So this was an attempt to begin pressure on the wider party, and in particular the next leader, whoever wins. They're going to have to make spending promises. And are they going to explain the maths behind them? Johnson just replied that the commitments were all good as far as he could tell, and the government will hire more police officers and build more hospitals. Now, it's going to be now really easy for him to talk confidently of those promises, because he promised those things, and he can claim forevermore now that he would have delivered them if he'd have carried on. If the promises don't materialise, and they won't, he can always claim that his successor dropped the ball. Well, they would have been, but you got rid of me, so now it's Mordaunt's fault, or whoever follows him. The problem with PMQs now, Johnson can promise the earth with zero consequences because it's no longer for him to deliver. He will say he would have delivered. If you try and say, well, you weren't exactly on trajectory, he'll just say, yeah, I was. As far as the public are concerned, they don't know. Starmer then noted Zahawi's promise to cut all government departments by 20%. Now, Starmer mentioned that it was 20% cuts to budgets, which was my understanding as well. But I have seen some suggesting that Zahawi meant 20% cuts to staffing, which would still be pretty severe. Either way, it's massive cuts to already undermined government departments. Departments that actually need more staff to deal with Brexit issues, not fewer. Downright dangerous policy. But Starmer asked if Zahawi made this policy announcement as a member of the government. Because this is an important question, really. So I would have assumed that Zahawi was making it as a pitch for Prime Minister. It was a policy promise for if he became Prime Minister. But it has to be said, he is Chancellor now. And budgets are the province of the Chancellor. So it is an important question to ask. Was it a policy announcement as a leadership candidate only? Is it a campaign promise? Or is it a policy announcement as the existing member of government who currently decides policies like that? Again, Johnson had no answer. Starmer ended up by saying he was going to miss Johnson's nonsense, but then turned attention to Sunak, who is the favourite. He noted that Rishi Sunak wants to fix the economy, and he asked the Prime Minister if he can think of any jobs Sunak may have had which would have had an impact on the economy. Obviously, Johnson didn't answer that question either. But then he said something I thought was a little odd. He said Starmer had been, he was, again, speaking at this point, as the final response, he was speaking as if it was a less than fond farewell to Keir Starmer. And he described Starmer as being considerably less lethal than other Labour leaders, whilst at the same time acknowledging that he was leaving not at a time of his choosing. And I'm thinking, well, so Johnson's admitting this is not the time he wanted to go. He's basically been forced out. He's admitting that. And he's saying that the leader of the opposition at a time like this was less lethal than previous leaders. And I'm thinking, well, let's consider a couple of things. First of all, Keir Starmer objectively secured an investigation by the Privileges Committee into Johnson's line in Parliament. If nothing else, that would have got rid of Johnson. That would have got rid of Johnson. And I can't think of any other Labour leader that has secured an investigation into a Tory Prime Minister that required the backing of Tory MPs who formed a majority of the House. Second, slightly more subjective, but how many Labour leaders exactly have seen off a Tory Prime Minister mid-term with such a commanding majority? I mean, leaders do fall mid-term. We have this all the time. But they'll fall when either there isn't a majority or it's a very weak majority, so the rebels can cause trouble, or if they've been in a very long time. Like Thatcher, for example. 1987, the last general election she won it handsomely. And she fell in 1990. But she'd been Prime Minister for over 10 years. And there was an awful lot of politicking going on in her own party. And also, at the time, people believed that Neil Kinnock was going to win that next election. You know, Boris Johnson's not quite been Prime Minister for 3 years yet. He will be, because the news is now out that he's going to continue till September, so he will reach that landmark. But that was that. Starmer will presumably face Dim Dom the deputy next week, if Boris Johnson isn't going to be around. And then the real leader in September. So, Keir Starmer's going to have 3 PMQs in a row. He's going to have 3 different Prime Ministers, effectively. Ian Blackford, as you expect, used this, what may have been the last opportunity, to attack the Westminster system in general. He deplored the candidates on offer to replace Johnson. He said Johnson may be going, but look what we've got to come next. Bloody hellfire. He said, he didn't say that. He said he hoped the next leader would be as popular in Scotland as Johnson was. He may get his wish, actually. I noticed Penny Mordaunt, one of the favourites, seemed to relish playing the nationalist game here. She claims she's going to break the SNP. I'll sort them out. All right, then. Stephen Farry of the Alliance Party asked if Johnson would apologise for the harm he's done to Northern Ireland. Johnson responded that the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill would fix the problems. This is not unlike asking an arsonist to apologise for the fire they've just started, and then the arsonist to go, don't you worry, son, I'm going to pour some kerosene over it, that'll sort it out. But Tory's gonna Tory. Liz Saville-Roberts applied, asked if the government would scrap the 2-child limits for benefits, given the poverty crisis. I wouldn't normally mention this question because, just objectively, she's asking Johnson to commit to a policy, a new policy, and Johnson, as the outgoing Prime Minister, is not supposed to commit to any new policies. But his response was worth noting, I thought. He said, schools are the responsibility of the Welsh Government. It's like, well, partly, yeah. They don't have quite so much agencies in Scotland, but yeah, okay. But this wasn't a question about schools, was it? This is another of Johnson's typical responses. Could the Prime Minister tell us what he's going to do about child poverty? Yeah, car crashes are really bad, aren't they? Yeah, thanks for that, Prime Minister. Not really answering the question, but thanks for waking up for it. But there we are. I said last week it might have been Johnson's last PMQs then, as it was. Tory MPs couldn't persuade him to resign immediately, and they didn't force him out, so we've got this. He sounded like he won't be around for next week, but unless he's got something planned, he will be. So maybe this actually was his last, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe he's delighting in this. It might have been his last week, it wasn't. It might be his last this week, it might not be. Maybe he just delights in playing these silly games, like the malevolent goblin he is. You know, I imagine Boris Johnson enjoys making people dance to his little tune, and this is maybe just part of it. And maybe he is going to turn up next week. Or maybe he does have a plan to bugger off somewhere. I don't know. We'll see. Those are my thoughts on what was either his final or his penultimate PMQs. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.